She mentioned that she and Ray had been about to have breakfast, and Nick inquired whether they were a thing. Sharon confirmed that she and Ray were together, and Nick stammered that he'd been caught off guard. Sharon pointed out that he'd shown up uninvited, and Nick promised to leave after he said what he was there to say. He offered her a job. Ray prepared to leave to let Nick and Sharon have a private conversation, and he encouraged Sharon to hear Nick out. Sharon and Ray kissed goodbye, and Ray departed. Nick bemoaned that he'd been losing people left and right at Dark Horse, and he mentioned that Jack had been voted in as CEO of Jabot. Sharon assumed that Phyllis had been fired, and she sarcastically suggested that Nick hire Phyllis. Nick recounted that Tabby had fired Arturo and had later quit herself, and he offered Sharon a job as head of public relations. She remarked that it was out of left field, but he reasoned that she had experience as a spokesperson and was great with people. Nick added that they made a great team, and she experienced a moment of déjà vu, since he'd said the same thing right before they'd been about to get married. Nick joked that he was just offering Sharon a job, not asking her to marry him again. They laughed, but she hesitated to risk the balance they found with their friendship and the kids. Nick clarified that he hadn't made the offer because of their personal relationship but because he thought she'd be great at the job, and it could be an exciting new challenge for her. Sharon explained that she'd gone back to school to do something with more of a personal connection and purpose, and Nick suggested that he put her in charge of Dark Horse's charity work as well as handling the PR. Ray arrived home and rifled through his box of belongings from the police station, including a photo of Mia in her wedding dress. He called Mia's doctor's office to ask some questions about Mia's pregnancy. Ray explained that he was Mia's husband and claimed that their hectic schedules hadn't allowed them to attend appointments together, but he failed to get any information because he wasn't the patient. There was a knock at the door, and Ray said he'd call back. Ray opened the door and invited Sharon in, and he inquired about the new job. She informed him that she hadn't taken it, although she might help Nick with some charity work on the side. She realized that she was actually enjoying unemployment, and she wanted to take more time off to spend with Ray to get their new relationship off on the right foot. They kissed. Sharon felt like a jerk for yammering on about a job she'd turned down while Ray was mourning the one he'd lost. She recognized that being a cop was a big part of who he was, and he confided that he'd been wondering who he was without his job. She asserted that he was still a cop, even if he wasn't employed as one. Ray stood by what he'd done, and Sharon called him a hero in her eyes. She recommended that he try talking to Paul again, but Ray considered the chances of changing Paul's mind slim to none. Sharon brightly pointed out that neighboring towns needed smart, dedicated detectives, but Ray assumed that they'd heard why he'd been fired. Sharon encouraged Ray to explain the extenuating circumstances, and she thought Paul and Christine might still give him a good reference. Ray thanked Sharon for having his back, and she seductively replied that she had every side of him. He jokingly asked if she was using him for sex, and she replied that it was just one of the benefits of being with him. She stressed that she wanted him to be able to talk to her about anything, and they kissed. They embraced, but he stared over Sharon's shoulder at Mia's photo. Sharon returned home and found an envelope on her front door. She discovered an ultrasound photo inside, along with a note addressed to Ray from Mia, stating that it was baby Rosala's first picture. Sharon reeled. At the state penitentiary, Lily entered the visitor's room and faced Kane, who was happy that she'd wanted to see him. Lily explained that she'd wanted Kane to have time with the divorce papers to absorb the news, but she didn't want to raise his expectations. Kane declared that he was there to let her know they could make it work, but she asserted that she'd been through every argument in her mind, and they'd all led to the same place, divorce. Kane blamed her decision on being locked up, but Lily countered that prison had given her the freedom to think on her own. He swore that he didn't want to fight with her, but he wanted her to see that she was making a mistake. Kane reiterated that what had happened with Victoria had been a moment of weakness, and he regretted that he had hurt Lily. He stressed that it wasn't something to leave their marriage over and that they should try to save it. Lily said she'd heard the speech before, but she could finally see what was broken between them, and it couldn't be fixed. Kane was convinced that she was only saying it because she was trapped there, and their separation had made her forget how good they were together. Lily contended that they'd had a million chances, but they'd caused one another pain every time they'd made a new start. Kane grimly noted that it sounded like Lily had made her decision. He wondered what they should do about the kids, and she thought the twins were mature enough to handle it. He inquired about Sam, and she sighed deeply. Lily insisted that she loved the tot like he was her own and that he would always be a part of her life, but she wasn't his biological mother because he was the product of Kane's affair. She added that she wasn't saying it with malice but to make the point that there was more wrong with their marriage than just Victoria. Lily thought she and Kane had to stop running away from their history. Lily recalled that she and Kane had failed one another more than once, but he protested that they weren't quitters. He contended that all they had to do was put in the work, and she countered that it meant exploring why they'd kept hurting one another, but he wasn't willing to do it. Kane figured that Lily had lost control and was desperate to get it back, but Lily insisted that her time in prison had prepared her for the life she wanted once she got out. Kane argued that the life she needed was with him and kids, where she belonged. Lily announced that she was being released sooner than expected, and that had been why she'd sent the divorce papers. She explained that she'd been granted an early release for the work she'd done with the other prisoners, and Kane explained that she would be free. Lily expected that she wouldn't be if she walked back into the same life she'd had before, so it was time for a fresh start. She was sure that he needed a fresh start, too, but he didn't want to start over without her. He pleaded that it couldn't be how they ended, and she softly replied, "Yet it is." Kane sadly said he loved Lily, and she returned the sentiment. He asked where she'd go, and she didn't know, but she wanted a simpler life. She added that she wanted them both to be happy. Kane couldn't help but think that things would be much different if it hadn't been for the accident, and they'd be happily living their lives. Lily wasn't convinced, since if the accident hadn't happened, something else would have. A guard entered, and Lily took Kane's hands in hers and firmly stated that prison hadn't ended their marriage. They had. The guard led her out. At the Abbott mansion, Dina entered the living room and wailed that someone had changed everything, so she didn't know where anything was. Tracy encouraged her to sit down, but Dina snapped that she didn't like the couch. Dina greeted Kyle as Jackie, and he assured her that they would figure out what was going on. Dina groused that someone had bought new furniture without her approval, and she glared at Tracy and complained that the maid was of no help. Dina spotted Summer and assumed that she was Ashley, and Summer played along. Dina ordered the maid to make tea, and Tracy looked devastated. Tracy called Jack and requested that he return home to help with Dina. Meanwhile, Kyle volunteered to change the room back to the way Dina liked it. Summer claimed that Dina had once told her that change could be scary but also good. Dina smiled and asked if she'd really said that, and Summer soothed that sometimes people wanted things to stay the same because it was comforting, but it could be an exciting ride to embrace change. Dina thought that made a lot of sense, and she told Kyle that his sister was very insightful. Jack arrived at the mansion, and Dina addressed him as John. Dina explained that Jack and Ashley didn't know who'd been moving things around, and it had made her realize that she hadn't been paying much attention to what had been going on at home. Jack understood that she'd been very busy, but Dina stressed that she hadn't been there enough. She was adamant that her children deserved everything she and John could give them, and Jack agreed. Dina gushed that Jack and Ashley had a wonderful bond, and she urged them to stick together and know that the sky was the limit for both of them. Kyle returned after helping Dina to get settled upstairs, and he praised Summer for being great with his grandmother. Summer figured that she just followed his lead and that since she was his wife, it made Dina her family, too. Kyle was glad that Dina liked her, but Summer clarified that Dina liked Ashley, not her. Kyle urged Summer to take the compliment, and he also lauded her for helping his family brainstorm ideas for Jabot. Summer gushed that she supported everything he did, and she was pleased that it felt like she was fitting in. She thought she could talk to him about anything, and she pressed to talk about the photo of Lola on his phone. Kyle downplayed it as just an old picture, but Summer was aware that he stared at it sometimes. Summer swore that she hadn't been snooping, but his phone had been next to the bed, and she happened to see it after they'd made love. Kyle apologized, and she admitted that it had hurt her feelings. He insisted that the last thing he wanted to do was hurt her, and he offered to delete everything about Lola on his phone. Summer confirmed that it would mean a lot, and he proceeded to do it. She thanked him with a hug, and he struggled to hide his emotions. Later, Jack thanked a delivery person and carried in a gift box of new beauty products, including an oversized bottle of Jack of Hearts cologne. He opened the accompanying envelope with a logo for My Beauty. He read a note from Ashley, taunting that it was a fight he couldn't win and that he'd go down as the man who had buried Jabot. At the athletic club, Billy stared at the online photo of Victoria in Las Vegas. He greeted Rebecca Barlow, who said she'd been intrigued by what he'd said on the phone about Jabot going in a new direction. He stressed that cosmetics would always be the company's bedrock, but they were also about to make a major impact in fashion. He believed she was the perfect person to guide them through an expansion, and she surmised that Phyllis was out as CEO. Billy recognized that Phyllis had had lapses in judgment, and he insisted that no one knew Jabot better than him and his brother. Rebecca stepped in close and implored him to tell her more. Billy pitched that Jabot was in a unique position to use its name and brand identity while functioning as a startup, scooping up young designers before anyone else did and marketing their designs in a new, smart way through social media. Billy wanted to proceed with Rebecca's guidance, and she proposed a 6-month consulting contract. He swore that she wouldn't regret it and that they might even have a bit of fun. She declared that it was the only reason she did anything, and he wished her a safe trip back to Chicago. Rebecca planned to take a few days to explore Genoa City, and Billy advised her not to get into too much trouble. She mischievously wondered where the fun was in that. Later, Tracy met Billy at the club, and he was sorry that he hadn't been there to help with Dina. An inebriated Kane nearly stumbled into them, and Billy remarked that it was a little early in the day. Kane slurred that he wasn't in the mood for Billy's judgment, and he accused Billy of meddling in people's lives when it was none of his business. Kane blurted out that his marriage was over, since Lily wanted a divorce. Billy sincerely said he was sorry to hear it, but Kane excoriated Billy for being the one who'd thrown the grenade to blow the marriage up. Tracy tried to intervene, but Kane pushed Billy and yelled that Billy had ruined his life and destroyed his marriage. Billy asked what Kane wanted from him, and Kane demanded that Billy admit what he'd done. Billy refused to apologize for telling the truth. Tracy sympathized that Kane was hurting and that his family was in crisis, but fighting wasn't the answer. Kane whimpered that there were no answers, and Tracy insisted on driving him home. Tracy steered Kane toward the door. Billy looked at the photo of Victoria partying and made a call. He asked for Victoria's room and learned that no one had registered under her name. At the Ashby home, Tracy made some coffee to sober Kane up so he could start to deal with the situation. Kane lamented that there was nothing he could do, since his marriage was over. Tracy asked if he was sure, and he replied that Lily had made it very clear. Tracy told him that she had some time and was a good listener, and she encouraged him to start at the beginning. At Crimson Lights, Nick awkwardly greeted Rebecca, and she acknowledged that they hadn't seen one another since the humiliating night in her suite. He suggested that they forget it had ever happened, but she thought it would be a shame to forget the harmless moments before Phyllis had shown up. Rebecca inquired about how Phyllis was doing after being ousted as CEO, and Nick replied that they weren't together anymore. Rebecca imagined that there had been some red flags in the relationship, like how Phyllis had pimped him out to score a deal. Nick quipped that it wouldn't even make the top 10 list of their problems. Nick wondered what Rebecca was doing in town, and she explained that she'd been offered a consulting position at Jobot. He asked if she'd be in town more often, and she flirtatiously replied that it depended on whether she found it interesting enough to stick around. Rebecca admitted that she was used to being in control, not being played like she had been in the hotel suite. Rebecca figured that as a boss, she had to be decisive and sometimes merciless, and she questioned whether Nick's leadership style was to be liked or feared. Nick said his father instilled fear, but he preferred to be likable with a hint of scary. Rebecca confirmed that she liked him, and he teased that he was a little scared of her. She implied that it was nothing a few cocktails wouldn't cure. He offered to take her out and convince her to stay longer than she'd planned.